Hey, welcome back to my basement. This is Jeremiah. And hey, I wanted to make a quick video. Well, we'll see how quick it is. You know how I like to get talking. So, yesterday, actually, over the past couple days, I've been watching this interview that David Bombal did with a gentleman named Ivan Pep. I don't know how to pronounce this. Pepelnjak? Something like that? Pepelnjak? Probably not at all how to pronounce it. And there were some really interesting things that came out of that interview. They were generally talking about kind of getting your career going in IT. And some of the things that this gentleman, Ivan, had to say were what I would think could be very disheartening to someone who's just getting started. And I wanted to kind of give my perspective and for my own whatever, I kind of want to set the record straight because I disagree. Well, I think it's a great interview, and I highly recommend it. I'll make sure to include links to it um, in the description. But there are some things in here that I really, really disagree with. So let's. I'm not going to watch the video or anything with you guys, but let's talk a little bit about it. So first thing, let's come over and here's David's channel. If you're not familiar with David, he's a CCIE emeritus, and it's funny. I feel like I looked at him like a year ago, and he was nowhere near this size, and he's just really blown up over the past year. I think a lot of people have just been taking this time with COVID and everything, and kind of really focusing on maybe getting certifications or whatnot. But his channel has really exploded, so like that's awesome for him. And I think it's interesting because like a lot of people, if you look at his older certification stuff, he was trying to really cover the gambit, mostly Cisco, but really trying to like CCNP and stuff like that. And unfortunately, he learned the hard way that if you want to be successful, you really have to focus on the least common denominator, which is entry level certs. In fact, if you look at there's several of these certification guys, and it's mostly like entry level stuff and hacking for some reason. And I think it's just that those are the two things that bring the most people in. So it's like Kali Linux and stuff, which I don't even know anything about, but hacking and entry level networking and entry level cloud stuff. So his channel's kind of gone that way. And look, he's trying to build a career on YouTube, so good for him. I think he also sells courses for like CCNA and stuff like that. So that's cool. I feel a little bad for him because I feel like he wanted to do more. He wanted to kind of go more in depth, but it's really hard to make money doing that. In fact, if you're training for your NP or if you're like me, you're looking at your CCIE, especially for CCIE, there is very little training out there at all. It's just hard to make money because there's so few people relatively who are going for it. It's just hard to make money doing it. So I feel for people like him who are doing this stuff. But anyway, this is his channel, David Bombal. I guess I'm covering up his name with my bloop. There we go, David Bombal. Got a cough. Excuse me. So I have not been tested, but I am sure that I have COVID. I have been sick now for 2 months straight. 2 freaking months just being sick, and it's really just I'm so sick of it. No pun intended. All right, so what are the things that? So let's take a look here. Here's the video. I think this is actually part two. Part one: any future for network engineers. Really interesting stuff. This is the gentleman Ivan, and then in part two they kind of get into what you should be focusing on for your career. And then he kind of puts together this list of like what you should study, what you should learn. And this is what I want to talk about a little bit with you guys, because if you watch this again, you might have walked away from it feeling overwhelmed or disheartened and feeling like there's just no future. And, it can be really upsetting. So the first thing we need to do, well, how do I want to do this? So one thing is this Ivan guy, he's just not very big on certification. He just thinks it's silly. He's like, look, you got to do it just so your resume doesn't get thrown out, but there's no point to it. And he's also very much like vendor specific training is dumb. Why would you spend any time learning vendor specific stuff? You need to know the technology, not vendor commands. And you know what? He's right. You do, at some point, need to know the technology, not just the commands for Cisco or the commands for Juniper or whomever. So he's right, but he's also so freaking wrong. And there's this fascinating thing that when you look at people in his position, and you see this not just in this instance, but you see this everywhere in society, there's a couple different dynamics that are at play here. And I want to point this stuff out because I want you to know, A, this guy's a smart guy and he's worth listening to, but B, he also has no freaking clue what he's talking about. And those things are not as mutually exclusive as they sound. So first off, it's important to understand how the brain works. And one of the things that the brain does is as we age, the brain begins to forget stuff from when we were younger. Of course it does. It begins to consolidate memories from when we were younger. And this is very important. The brain has a tendency to downplay negative experiences in our life and play up positive experiences in our life. And why do we do this? Because if all we remembered was how hard life is, then most of us would just be in a fetal position, hiding in our bed, all day. So our brain, to protect us from ourselves, does this thing where when you look at the past, it doesn't seem that bad. And you see this in lots of different situations. One of the easiest examples is when couples get back together after they've broken up. I am one of the worst offenders at this. There is a woman that I broke up with so many times, and we always got back together, and then we'd always break up again, and this went on for years and years. And it's just because it's just how the brain works. It's just how the brain works. So when he's looking back, when he's giving you advice about starting your career, he's looking at his career through a filter that's not based on reality. Okay? That's the first thing. How we look back. The second thing that's important to understand is that, and this is all people, we tend to overestimate our own role in our success. So this guy, Ivan, is very successful. He's very successful. But because of that, like everyone else, he has overinflated his own role in that success. What do I mean by that? Well, if I look at my own career, when starting off in IT, I got into IT, depending on how you look at it, around 90, 95, if you want to count retail sales, which really isn't IT, but, I was around computers and stuff. And then in 97 or 98, I got into actually like doing IT stuff, like supporting users and building computers and working on servers and that kind of stuff. And, if you just look at my career, I started off with retail. I went into being a technician. Then I became like a junior engineer. Within a matter of a year or two, I was a senior engineer. I was in my early 20s and I had a team of 30 guys working for me, right? And then I went on and I decided to switch from server stuff to network stuff. And it was a similar thing. Like I took a role as a junior engineer. Within a couple of years, I'm the boss. And I got this whole team working for me. And so when you look at it on paper, it's like, God damn, man, that Jeremiah guy, he really knows what he's doing. His career really took off. I was making great money and my career just skyrocketed. And I have the tendency, like most people, to be like, well, I'm just really smart and I studied hard and I applied myself better than other people. And if other people worked as hard as I did, then they could have achieved the same things that I did. And there is some truth to that, but there's also a lot of arrogance and lies built in there, because the reality is every step along the way, it was me and the choices I made, but it was also other people who were helping me. Sometimes very obviously, and sometimes just in little ways. Passing my name off to a hiring manager, or letting me know about an opportunity, or putting a good word in for me, or mentoring me, or showing me how to do something, or in certain circumstances, I was really benefited by more senior engineers who actually refused to help me and just said, you know what, dude, this one, I'm busy. You got to go figure it out. And while that was really frustrating at the time, it propelled me forward. So there's all these people and circumstances that if any one of those things had changed, my life and my career could have been very different. So we always have to keep in mind that when Ivan is telling us this stuff, I get the impression he's forgotten that. He's forgotten that it wasn't just him that built this amazing career. It was all kinds of other people and circumstances along the way that helped him out in ways that some of which he's probably aware of and many of which he's probably very much not aware of. So, just keep that in mind. The other thing is I want to take a look at Ivan's career here. So this is worth keeping in mind. So he built his first proprietary WAN network in the early 1980s. Okay? Early 1980s. The world was a very different place back in the early 1980s. IT was a very different place in the early 1980s. What do we know about this guy? Well, we know he went to university. He studied computer science. When he left university, he got a job writing software as a developer. And then he I'm assuming, it doesn't really say, or I just skimmed over it, but he kind of stumbled into networking. And of course, he had to stumble into networking because networking was new. There was no certification. There was no, training programs for networking. Who did networking? IT guys. Who were IT guys? They were computer science guys. So the Wild West of the late 70s and the early 80s, that's when this guy's career started. And that was a time when if you were smart and had a degree in computer science and were willing to apply yourself, man, the world was your oyster. You could do anything. It's the time that a lot of us guys dream about, man, if I could only go back in time to that period, man, the things that I could do, the things I could accomplish, I'd be so rich today. I would have invented so many things, A lot of guys have this fantasy. Well, that's when he was starting his career. Not today, not when IT is a commodity, not when we live in a world where all business is based on IT, or needs it to us. You can't even go to a factory without computers and networking. It's everywhere. You can't, a fast food restaurant, you go buy a burger, they got flat screens and networks and servers in the back and everything. Like everything is IT today. And so huge portions of the job market are based on IT. And it's a commodity skill set nowadays. It's a very different world. And based on the things he's saying in these interviews, I don't think he truly grasps that. I think in some ways he still thinks that it's the Wild West of the early 1980s, late 1970s. So, excuse me. So, if you're watching this interview, keep that in mind. Like, again, what he's saying is good and ultimately right, but it's not necessarily going to apply to you. So one of the things that he says in this first interview, which just blew my mind, was, David, who his career now is based on teaching people entry-level IT skills. So he's very much focused on certifications and on entry-level skill sets because he wants to help people get into IT, build a career. He's the kind of guy, much like myself, who, he's very dropped out of college and then he actually apparently finished his degree part-time and then he's got his MCSE, then got his CCNA, and then his career took off. Same thing for me. Like I dropped out of school. I didn't go back to school. He did, but I dropped out of school. I eventually got my MCSE. My career really took off. Then I got my CCNA and took my career to a new place. So there's a lot of overlap in our stories. So I kind of identify with them. But, he's very much focused on this, certifications and training. And this Ivan guy has really good information, but he's kind of like anti-certification. And so it's funny watching the interview. Like you could tell David's trying to be like, oh, that's really interesting. But on the same time, he's like, F you, buddy. Like, what do you mean? Like, this is what I do for a living. You're basically insulting me and my audience. But one of the things that really, in this first interview that Ivan says is like, he says, Don't be the kind of person that you have to send your resume out. Be the person that they create a job just for you. Be the person that you're going to talk to people and they're going to say, I need someone like you. I'm going to go create a job just for you. And then you're going to fill that role. And, it's going to be amazing and just for you. Like, what fucking world do you live in, dude? What? We need to be the person that they make jobs just for us? What? Even at advanced levels, that is what, a 1 in 1,000 kind of thing. Maybe at the at high level career, someone who's been in their career for 20 plus years, that's an incredibly rare thing. And then for someone who's entry level, it's approaching zero. 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 people are going to have that experience of just being so unique that companies are going to make a position. Like, I'm sorry, man, but that is so disconnected from reality. And quite frankly, it's insulting to people who are starting off in their career. Now, maybe that's not what he intended, and maybe I'm taking it out of context. I don't know. Look, again, I think he's a really good guy, a really smart guy. He's worth listening to. I'm not trying to insult him, and I don't think he has any, there's nothing negative or nefarious about what he's saying. He's not trying to hurt anybody, but I think he might be a little disconnected from reality just because of where he is in his career. It's like, I was thinking about this earlier. Excuse me, I got a cough again. My dad, all right, who's in his late 60s now, 67, something like that, 68. Uh, my dad, when he was young, he was on welfare. Married, had my sister and maybe even me at one point. My sister's older, and was on welfare. So he's getting government assistance. Now, I don't know what they call it in your country. We call it welfare. We call it lots of different things here in the United States. But the dole, public assistance, whatever you want to call it. So he was living in a shithole and getting help from the government to feed his kids, right? But today, in his mid to late 60s, he's one of those people that if you are on government assistance, you're lazy, you're good for nothing, you're a leech on society. And it's like, dude, wait a minute, that was you. And he's like, well, no, I was different. I was different. Today, all these people are just lazy. And it's like, it's just one of those things where, like, as you get older, you become so disconnected and you become so self-focused that you're always the hero of your own story. So it's just an example of how, like, I think it's just human nature. It's just human nature. So I don't think again, he's not a bad guy. But this idea that you could just, by networking and stuff, companies are just going to create a position for you. No, that's not how it works. So sorry, but no. So that was kind of one of the things that bothered me quite a bit about what he had to say. And then, so here's the list of, like, the technologies that he says you need to learn to get an entry level position. Now, again, let's look at him. What did he do? He went to university. He spent years studying software, and this was back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So it was kind of a different thing. I'm sure he studied mathematics. He studied programming. He probably even had he's right out of university. I think he said he did writing device drivers or something, and symbolic kernel debugger. So he understood the hardware. Back then software and hardware were much, much closer than they are nowadays. So he had to have a functional level of hardware and software. And what did he do? After spending years studying that stuff, he went and got a job doing exactly what he had been studying, right? Over time, he got into networking. Over time, he learned different technology. Eventually he learned Linux. Eventually he learned, over time he got a CCIE. Over time he's studied Python or studied cloud-based stuff. So this is somebody who over 35 years a 30 plus year career, has slowly and incrementally picked up all these technologies, and yet he's kind of saying, well, you need to know a subset of everything I know if you're going to get started in networking. No, no, that is so just untrue. Again, I don't know what world this guy's living in. So he's saying like, okay, go get your CCNA because you need some basic networking. You also need to know Linux, you need to know Git, you need to know Python. You better be good with some form of automation, so Ansible or something else. You need to be able to not only network on Cisco stuff, but you better be able to get Cisco and Linux talking to each other. You need to know all the different cloud stuff, and you need to have soft skills. And it's like, dude, again, David is asking about entry-level stuff. This right here, everything that he's talking about, is a minimum of 5 years worth of knowledge. Minimum of 5 years worth of knowledge. And for most people, that's not how the world works. You know, he's someone who came from academia, and I get the impression that he has been at this senior level for so long that playing around and building labs and testing things is part of his job. I think he thinks that you and I have hours and hours to lab and learn every single day. You know, one of the reasons I don't have my my CCIE yet is when I was full into my career in networking was I worked 10 plus hours a day. I often worked 6 days a week. Not all the time, but look, 55, 60-hour work weeks were normal. Coming home and then trying to study and learn. I know there are people that do it. I'm not trying to say that it's impossible. But like, you get to the point you're just so freaking exhausted. And it's not just the hours that you work. You know, depending on your career, I found myself under tremendous amounts of stress. There was huge, multi-million-dollar projects on my shoulders. And so, and then, okay, maybe I only worked 60 hours this week, only 60 hours a week, but I worked like 40 hours during the day. And then I came in 2 or 3, a couple nights during the week and a couple nights on the weekend, working another 5 or 10 hours. And so my sleep is all messed up. And this guy's saying like, why don't you just learn all these other technologies? I don't understand. Don't you just have time? Like at one point he says like, if you come home and you don't have 4 hours to lab every day, then you're not working hard enough. And it's like, no, that's not the real world. That might be your world as this senior level advanced guy who is paid as a consultant. And, I bet he has 4 hours a day. And I bet he's a hardworking guy. I'm not trying to say he's not. But he has the time to sit around and learn all these technologies. And again, keep in mind, much of this stuff he's done over 35 years. It was an incremental thing. He didn't graduate from university knowing everything. No, he graduated knowing computer science. He was able to program. And he applied that to a specific type of programming. And then his career moved into networking. It was a gradual thing. And then from networking, it eventually over time became senior level networking. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was only Cisco for a few years. And then his career forced him to become more vendor agnostic, because that's how it usually goes. I was only Cisco for a long time, and then I started doing Juniper. I started doing F5. I started doing NetScaler. Who makes NetScaler? I can't remember. But I was working on NetScalers. I was working on F5 load balancers. I was working on Juniper routers and switches and Cisco stuff. So like, eventually your career kind of forces you to learn those things. That's how most people learn. That's how he learned. He didn't just sit down and learn all this stuff. So listen, I want you to watch these videos, because there really is good information there about the reality of networking. It's kind of separating the hype from the reality, and separating like, some of the fearfulness of where we're at, that, automation is going to replace everything, to the reality of, look, there's always going to be a need for humans to a certain point, at least within our lifetimes. So it's good information. Everything that he's saying is good. It's worth listening to. But when you listen to it, I'd really like you to just take a step back, recognize that he's coming from a position of someone who's been in this thing since the Wild West days of the late 70s, of computing. He came up in a time that was completely, he was at the bleeding edge of network. There wasn't even, networking barely existed when he got into networking. So this idea that he thinks you need to learn all this stuff before you can get an entry level position is kind of bullshit. Now, to be fair, in one of the other videos, maybe part one, I think this is part two, well, part one, he does say a little bit different, but he also says like you need to go in with like 5 strong skills. And again, I just don't think that's really not how most entry level people are going to be. You can only learn so much, and you have to have a job, right? You can only spend so much time studying before you got to get a goddamn job. So I think I've kind of beat this horse to death. So let's just leave it at that. But I hope this was interesting. I do encourage you to watch the videos. It is interesting, but also don't allow yourself to feel overwhelmed. The way he says things, at least the way that I interpret it, was he makes it sound like you have to have 10 years of experience before you can get an entry level job. No. Okay. You're going to be okay. Do your CCNA, start looking for jobs. There are thousands and thousands of CCNA level jobs out there. You got to start somewhere. Start somewhere. Get good at that. Start layering on over time, slowly adding skills. And in 5 or 10 or 15 years, your career is going to be in an amazing place. But it takes time to get there. So you have time. Just do one thing at a time. You're going to be all right. All right. Thanks. Hey, listen, I hope you enjoyed watching this. I'll see you next time.